I'm really happy and proud to present Reverend Jim Rigby, who's the Reverend at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Austin and a great speaker for justice and peace.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming out. The talks I've given over the years that I'm proudest of are the little groups of people who take up on popular causes and meet in less than ideal conditions. And I would think this certainly qualifies as less than ideal conditions. But that speaks to the importance of the cause to which we speak. And I think half of the equation is talking about being against war. And you can't leave that out. That is very, very important. But I want to talk today also about the work of peacemaking, which is the other side of the equation that often gets left out of demonstrations because we forget that we're all part of what makes war inevitable. That very often by looking at the most egregious examples of violence, we forget that the economic system in which we live inevitably leads us to war, as the gentleman before me pointed out. And very few people, liberal or conservative, are willing to really look at the inevitable link between our predatory capitalism and the war that we hate so much. Very few of even the most liberal and progressive people are willing to look at the roots of what makes us feel proud, what makes us feel comfortable, what makes us feel safe, the link between that and the kinds of wars that we see. Obama ran on a peace ticket, as did Woodrow Wilson, and with very similar results, because both of them had only superficially analyzed the roots of war. It would be so easy if hate were the root of war, to find that small group of violent people and isolate them, and the rest of us could live in peace. But the problem is that the things that make war inevitable are things that often we do love. I'm not assuming for a second that anyone here is a Christian or even a religious person, but in my faith there's a story of when Jesus was going to Jerusalem and he stopped to weep. It says because they did not know what makes for peace. And that's, I think, our most important work. To teach people the link between war and how we live and how we think. In the ancient world, they talk about the classical virtues, and that's what I want to talk about very briefly today. The root of war is not simply hatred. It's also fear. And we do not live in the most courageous nation in the world. We call it the home of the brave, but we're bombing anything that has a shadow cast upon it by our fear. We need to teach courage and call each other to courage, which means a willingness to suffer that most Americans have never taken on, and most progressives and most liberals have never taken on, a willingness to be imprisoned, to be impoverished, to be hated, to be hurt because we want to live for peace. Another root of war is sometimes called greed, but when it's in our own lives, it's simply comfort. It's simply living a lifestyle that has a tremendous cost on people all over the world. Capitalism has always been based on slavery. It was based on slavery in-house, and now it's based on slavery out-house. It's based on sweatshops. It's based on things that Obama will never talk about. But we need to talk about it. We need to be the best friends that the third world has ever had. Bringing into people's homes, into our families, into our friends, into our classrooms. The other side of the story, which leads us to propaganda. Ignorance is a great cause of war. And by ignorance, I mean looking at things from your own point of view and not being able to understand that people would have different thoughts than yours. We need to teach Americans to read newspapers from other countries. Our newspapers, our media, our television shows are all bought and owned by the sources of war. And if Americans do not learn to listen to people from outside our boundaries and to stop that belief that everybody born within our boundaries is mysteriously good, born good, doesn't need to be questioned, to be followed without examination, and the belief that anyone born slightly on the outside of our boundary is suspect as a human being, then there's no hope for war. And the final thing the gentleman was speaking about is the things that give us pride. My dad died about a week ago. I was in Dallas for the funeral, in Dallas back again for the burial, and he was buried in the National Cemetery there in Arlington. And the road that leads to the cemetery is called Patriot Boulevard. And there's a Baptist university at the top of the hill, and their mascot is the Patriot. And they have this Christian school with angry patriots as their mascot. Very, very strange. As the gentleman was saying, we need to learn our own humanity. As Einstein said, remember your humanity, forget the rest. We need to teach people that if they're going to be religious, that needs to be an aspect of their humanity and not a replacement for their humanity. And if they're going to be citizens of a nation, that needs to be an aspect of their world citizenship and not a replacement for that. The last days of Martin Luther King's life, he spoke of being a world citizen. And he spoke for the people who were voiceless in our country, the Vietnamese. And he talked about the real causes of their struggle, of which we were guilty. We need to leave this day with that charter. Not simply to be against war, but to be in favor of those things that actually might replace war in our lives. I'm talking about the classical virtues, the things that people learned in the Middle Ages, they learned in classical Greek and Rome, to dismantle the empire. Wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. Go in peace.